The early Triassic fossil record reveals one of the most puzzling reptiles that ever existed, Tanystropheus, an animal whose shape defies almost any anatomical logic. Its body was relatively compact, but from it emerged a neck so disproportionate that it easily exceeded the length of the rest of the body. It was not a flexible neck like that of later sauropods, but a rigid, almost straight structure formed by extremely elongated vertebrae that functioned like an extended arm to reach prey without moving the trunk. This improbable shape defined its entire ecology, from hunting to the way it faced dangers that other reptiles did not even encounter. Studies of the skeleton show that the neck was supported by hollow vertebrae, so long that a single one could match the full length of a skull. This design produced a strange effect. Despite its slender appearance, the neck maintained a relatively robust structure, although limited in movement. The joints did not allow a wide range of flexion, so the animal could not bend it like a modern long-necked predator would. The result was an almost geometric profile, a silhouette that advanced in a straight line from the body to the head. This rigidity meant that every strike or turn had to be calculated, and it is likely that its hunting style depended on holding its position and letting the neck do the work rather than actively chasing prey. One of the central questions about Tanystropheus has been its lifestyle. Its excessive neck seems unsuitable for moving on land, where a sudden movement could destabilize it. Instead, fossil evidence and functional analysis suggest that it spent much of its time in or very near water. The cervical length allowed it to exploit a specific ecological resource, catching fish and small aquatic animals without submerging its entire body. The anatomy of its limbs aligns with a semi-aquatic life, though it did not make it a perfect swimmer. It seemed to rely more on stalking in shallow areas, extending its neck forward like a silent spear. The skull reinforces this idea. Rather than a powerful bite, the head was relatively small and light, equipped with sharp, curved teeth that acted like a comb to catch slippery fish. It did not need to crush or tear, but to secure thin, mobile prey. The thin jaw allowed a quick closure, compensating for its limited ability to move the neck. Acting like a rigid stick, speed depended on the jaw snap rather than cervical mobility, and this combination reveals a predator carefully adapted to a very specific niche. From remains found in Europe and the Middle East, paleontologists have identified individuals of different sizes, leading to decades of speculation about whether they were different species or simply males and females with marked dimorphism. More recent research suggests that there were two particular forms: a smaller one, with thin teeth for feeding on fish, and a more robust one, with dentition adapted to hard-shelled prey. This difference points to a rare case in prehistory, two variants of the same lineage that shared a habitat but exploited different resources, reducing direct competition. This interpretation also explains why Tanystropheus could remain a successful predator in Triassic coastal ecosystems, but that monumental neck, so useful for hunting, also represented a weakness. Some Triassic creatures could exploit it as a vulnerable point. Modern paleontological literature has highlighted that, despite its imposing appearance, Tanystropheus may have suffered a particularly dramatic type of death: decapitation. The elongated, rigid neck, composed of long vertebrae, functioned almost like a lever for its predators. If an animal bit or struck it in the right spot, the structure could fracture. The very feature that distinguished it also made it an easy target for sudden forces, lateral attacks, or attempts to drag it. Research reported by specialists in scientific media describes cases in which fossils show signs of separation between the neck and the body. This pattern led to the idea that the animal could die relatively easily when a large predator applied pressure or traction at the end of the neck. It was a constant risk for a reptile that, due to its structural rigidity, could not coil its body in quick defensive maneuvers, much less bend its neck to avoid a direct bite. The vulnerability becomes even more evident when considering that the Triassic was a period full of evolutionary experiments, with predators testing all kinds of tactics on prey with novel anatomies. Specialists who have studied its biomechanics indicate that the neck was not only long but surprisingly fragile at specific points. Force applied by an attack could generate a natural lever, multiplying the pressure on a vertebra until it broke. This phenomenon explains why so many remains are found with the neck separated. It would not be a post-mortem anomaly, but an event linked to the death itself. In ecosystems where opportunistic predators coexisted, this weakness shaped its behavior, likely forcing it to avoid areas where its silhouette was too visible or where performing evasive maneuvers became more difficult. The biology of Tanystropheus suggests that its strategy consisted of minimizing risk through an ambush lifestyle. It did not actively pursue prey. It preferred to lie in wait at the boundary between water and land, partially hidden by the surface or coastal vegetation. Its rigid neck functioned like a telescopic arm which could be projected forward without moving the body. This allowed it to conserve energy and reduce the possibility of losing balance. This lifestyle explains why its neck needed to be so long, not to reach plants or compete with other reptiles for height, but to extend its hunting range without compromising its stability. A recent study that has brought Tanystropheus back to the center of paleobiological debate points out that its morphology was so extreme that few later animals replicated it. Most long-necked species opted for more flexible and adaptable structures, something this reptile did not develop. Its cervical rigidity revealed a specialized and risky evolutionary path, efficient as long as the environment remained stable, but vulnerable to any changes in predators, coastal dynamics, or prey availability. This makes Tanystropheus a symbol of the Triasic's evolutionary bets, creatures that seemed designed for a perfect niche, yet carried weaknesses that could cost them their lives. A key conclusion of modern analyses is that most of its success depended on the balance between opportunity and risk. Every time it extended its neck to catch a fish, it exposed the most sensitive part of its anatomy to the sight of larger predators. That vulnerability did not prevent its survival for millions of years, but it does explain why its shape did not continue in later lineages. Rigid, elongated structures prove too limiting to face a world where rapid adaptation is essential. The prodigious neck of Tanystropheus was, at the same time, its most effective tool and its deadly trap. Its story ends in the fossils that reveal how many times that very trait that defined it became the point where life was cut short. Charovipteryx. Charovipteryx was a Triassic reptile whose anatomy defies almost all expectations regarding the shape and function of vertebrates. Its name literally means Charov's wing, in honor of the paleontologist Alexander Grigorovich Charov, who in 1971 described the only known fossil of this species. He originally called it Podopteryx mirabilis, meaning wing on the foot, but the name was later changed to Charovipteryx because the previous name was already taken by an insect. The skeleton found in the Madigan Formation, in what is now Kyrgyzstan, dates to approximately 230 to 225 million years ago, in the Middle to Late Triassic. This fossil is mostly articulated, showing complete parts of the organism and some soft tissue impressions. What makes Charovipteryx extraordinary is its body plan. It was a very small reptile, with a slender body and an extremely long tail, but what really sets it apart are the structures that functioned as wings located on its hind limbs. Unlike all known gliding and flying vertebrates such as pterosaurs, birds, or bats, its flight surfaces did not extend from the arms but from the hind legs and pelvis. These skin membranes connecting the hind limbs to the trunk and tail formed a wing area that some describe as similar to a delta wing, an extreme and unusual design not repeated in any other known evolutionary lineage of reptiles. The structure of Charovipteryx suggests it was bipedal, with a well-developed pelvis, more sacral vertebra than modern lizards, very long hind limbs compared to the forelimbs, a short torso and a thin tail. These anatomical features align with the idea that it did not move in a traditional quadrupedal manner, nor was it a typical runner, but its body adaptations were oriented toward passive aerial locomotion. The forelimbs of Charovipteryx were very small, and the presence of any membrane on them is uncertain because the area around them is damaged in the only fossil. If a front membrane did exist, it could have functioned like the canards on some airplanes, providing additional flight control surfaces, acting as stabilizers for body attitude while gliding. Due to this highly unusual configuration, with main membranes between the hind limbs rather than the forelimbs, Charovipteryx has been described in some studies as the world's first delta wing-type glider, with the wing formed primarily by the skin stretched between its hind legs and tail. Experiments conducted with models of its morphology suggest it could glide with stability if it held its hind legs at certain angles and extended its feet. thereby maximizing the wing surface. The tail and potential forelimb appendages, if they had membranes, could also have influenced control and balance during gliding, acting as rudders or auxiliary surfaces that modified aerodynamic resistance. This mode of locomotion was not active flapping flight like that of birds or pterosaurs, but controlled gliding, allowing a form of passive aerial movement in which the animal would jump from an elevated point and use its wings to moderate the fall and move between vertical elements in the environment, such as trees or elevated terrain. Evidence suggests that Charovipteryx could have leapt from branches or similar heights, extending its hind limbs and membrane to catch the air and glide short distances between high points. This adaptation would have allowed it to exploit resources that other terrestrial animals could not reach without active flight. The skeletal shape and membrane distribution in Charovipteryx also indicate that, despite being a glider, terrestrial locomotion was not entirely practical for it. The membranes on the hind limbs would have hindered rapid running or agile maneuvers on the ground, implying that its life was probably centered in environments where vertical mobility, climbing and descending, was more common than simple horizontal running. The uniqueness of Charovipteryx makes it an extreme example of experimental evolution, in the sense that it represents such a rare and specialized anatomical solution for gliding that it is almost never repeated in any other vertebrate lineage. Most other gliding animals develop wing surfaces on the arms or along extended ribs, but it did so primarily on its hind limbs. From a taxonomic perspective, Charovipteryx is classified within the Prolacertiforms, a group of early archosauromorphs, although its exact relationship to other ancient gliding reptiles is debated. Recent analyses have suggested it could be related to reptiles like Ozymek, another Triassic glider, and together they could form part of the family Charovipterygidae, although the phylogenetic evidence is not entirely conclusive. The only known Charovipteryx fossil not only reveals an unexpected anatomical design, but also shows that Triassic evolution explored many different paths toward gliding and flight, from reptiles with extended ribs to those, like it, that developed membranes between their hind legs and the rest of the body. Drepanosaurus unguicaudatus was a Triassic reptile whose anatomy makes it one of the strangest evolutionary experiments known among archosauromorphs. It lived around 230 million years ago in forested and coastal environments that today correspond to northern Italy and parts of the southwestern United States. Its name means sickle lizard, referring to the curved shape of certain prominent claws that characterize its anatomy. This animal was neither a dinosaur nor a modern lizard. It belonged to the Drepanosauromorphs, a group of diapsid reptiles with unique body adaptations, some of which have even been associated with Prolacertiforms. Current classification frameworks suggest that Drepanosauromorphs may fit within the traditional group Protorosauria, although the monophily of that clade is debated. The strangeness of Drepanosaurus begins with its body, known almost exclusively from incomplete fossils. Only one complete adult specimen and 2 juveniles have been found, and curiously none preserve the neck or head. Nevertheless, the preserved remains allow reconstruction of an animal approximately 45 to 50 centimeters long, compact, with limbs and tail highly modified for an arboreal life. The tail of Drepanosaurus was prehensile, long, robust, and ending in a modified claw. This adaptation suggests that the tail was not merely a stabilizing appendage, but an active tool for grasping branches or even interacting functionally with the environment, similar to some modern climbing reptiles. The true uniqueness of Drepanosaurus is seen in its forelimbs. The bones of its forearms and wrists are arranged unlike most tetrapods. The radius and ulna were not parallel, but the ulna was flat and crescent-shaped, and 2 carpal bones were elongated and seemingly incorporated into the forearm region. This configuration is completely atypical among 4-limbed vertebrates and breaks the anatomical patterns observed in practically all known mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. The most obvious consequence of this radical anatomy was the presence of a gigantic claw on the second finger of each hand. This claw was extraordinarily large in proportion to the rest of the limb and was probably used for tearing bark, digging into crevices, and extracting insects or small invertebrates. Researchers compare it to the claws of giant sloths, but even in that context, the Drepanosaurus structure is more specialized. Its claw was adapted to a very powerful hook-and-pull motion. The function of this claw has been interpreted as analogous to the digging mechanism of modern anteaters, in which the animal inserts its claw into a nest or substrate and then retracts the entire forearm forcefully to break the structure and reach its prey. Although Drepanosaurus was neither a mammal nor an anteater, its robust forearm and inferred musculature suggest similar behavior aimed at accessing insects under bark and within deep crevices. The extreme modification of the forelimbs not only alters the function of the claw, but completely reinvents the mechanics of the forearm bones. In a typical tetrapod, parallel radius and ulna allow pronation and supination, rotation of the hand, common in climbing or hunting animals. In Drepanosaurus, however, the configuration of these bones indicates that the usual wrist movement was replaced by a design specialized for hooking and pulling. This puzzles paleontologists because it implies that this reptile broke anatomical constraints that had persisted for over 350 million years in tetrapod evolution. The arboreal life of Drepanosaurus is supported by several other anatomical features. Its legs and feet were capable of grasping branches easily, suggesting possibly opposable digits or adaptations for holding. The general structure of its body and limbs, along with the prehensile tail, indicates that the reptile spent most of its time in trees, moving between branches and trunks with a combination of climbing and grasping. Although it has been discussed whether Drepanosaurus might have had digging habits in addition to arboreal ones, current evidence suggests its tail lacked sufficient flexibility to dig effectively. Its most likely use was as an anchoring and balancing element while moving through the forest canopy. The skull of Drepanosaurus remains unknown. No fossil has preserved this part, and paleontologists extrapolate its shape based on close relatives within Drepanosauridae, such as Megalanchosaurus. These relatives have relatively light triangular skulls, which was probably also true for Drepanosaurus. Beyond the size and function of its claws, Drepanosaurus represents an early example of extreme specialization among Triassic reptiles, a period marked by body and ecological experimentation that gave rise to highly diverse forms, such as the Drepanosauromorphs. In this context, the adaptation of Drepanosaurus to an arboreal niche with a grasping and digging system is so peculiar that no modern group reproduces its combination of traits exactly. Although its fossil record is scarce, each associated discovery, especially the well-preserved three-dimensional material from New Mexico, has reinforced the idea that Drepanosaurus possessed an anatomy radically different from any other earlier or later tetrapod. Its claws were not only feeding tools, but changed the mechanics of the forelimb in a way no other reptile seems to have explored until the emergence of specialized mammals millions of years later. This singular reptile seems to have combined traits from different lifestyles, arboreal, digging, and insectivorous, through an unprecedented anatomical synthesis, making Drepanosaurus one of the strangest evolutionary experiments of the Triassic. Atopodentatus. Atopodentatus unicus is one of the strangest marine reptiles described in the fossil record, a vivid example of the experimental evolutionary pathways explored by life after the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. This animal inhabited the shallow seas of the Middle Triassic around 240 million years ago during the Anisian in what is now Yunnan province in southwestern China. Its combination of body size, cranial morphology, and jaw apparatus has puzzled paleontologists since its discovery, forcing successive revisions of how this unusual reptile may have fed and lived. The first fossil evidence of Atopodentatus came from an almost complete skeleton found near the village of Daozi in the Guanling Formation, as well as from a partial left skull specimen. The exceptional preservation allowed study not only of the body proportions but also of the skull and dentition, revealing features never before seen in Triassic marine reptiles. The genus name itself reflects the rarity of its design. Atopodentatus combines the Greek atopos, meaning strange, absurd, or out of place, with the Latin dentatus, meaning toothed, in reference to its atypical dentition. The specific epithet unicus further emphasizes its uniqueness among known vertebrates. Initially, the reconstruction of Atopodentatus's skull was so unusual that paleontologists described it with an upper jaw featuring teeth along the edges and then arranged vertically in the center, producing a zipper of small teeth appearance. This interpretation presented a peculiar face, with the jaw curved downward, leading the general public to imagine a bizarre mouth opening in a V-shape or abnormal smile. However, discoveries in 2016 radically changed the view of its cranial anatomy. Newly discovered, better-preserved skulls revealed that Atopodentatus did not have a split upper jaw, but rather a hammer-shaped head, with broad bony processes extending laterally from the upper and lower jaw bones. This morphology, unlike the primitive zipper concept, is now the defining feature of this reptile's skull. The hammer-shaped head and jaw suggest a highly specialized feeding mode. The front teeth were chisel-like, thick and robust, located at the anterior edges of the expanded skull, while the posterior jaw regions were populated with many thin, pointed teeth forming a kind of mesh. This dental arrangement does not resemble that of any typical predator, but rather resembles the filtering and scraping structures used to process vegetation. According to the most accepted interpretation of these structures, Atopodentatus would have first used its chisel-like front teeth to scrape and detach algae or other vegetation attached to the rocky substrate of the seafloor. Then, after loosening small fragments of plant material, the reptile would open its mouth and allow water to enter, carrying the loosened particles with it. As the mouth closed, the water was expelled through the mesh of posterior teeth retaining the plant material. This feeding method is functionally reminiscent of modern whale filter feeding, though with a clearly different anatomy. This type of feeding places Atopodentatus among the earliest known marine herbivores, possibly the first of its kind among marine reptiles. Its jaw adaptations are incompatible with capturing mobile prey, as it does not possess the strong teeth or powerful bite associated with carnivores or even omnivores. Instead, its dental structures are designed to collect, filter, and process plants or microscopic vegetal matter. The body of Atopodentatus was relatively long, estimated at about 3 meters, with a short neck, robust limbs, and a strong pelvis, suggesting that in addition to swimming, the animal could move partially over shallow coastal substrates. These traits indicate a semi-aquatic lifestyle, although the cranioskeletal adaptations suggest that feeding was mainly conducted in shallow waters or near the seafloor. The sediments and geological context of the Guanling Formation, where the fossils were found, correspond to a relatively well-lit, shallow marine environment with abundant plant life and associated marine fauna, providing a suitable habitat for a reptile specialized in underwater herbivory. The presence of Atopodentatus in this environment demonstrates a rapid ecological diversification after the Permian-Triassic mass extinction, where herbivorous niches in marine environments were occupied by highly specialized forms in a geologically short time. The rediscovery and correct reconstruction of its jaw also helped better explain the functions of other cranial and muscular traits associated with feeding. For example, the hammer-shaped head creates a broad platform that could have facilitated lateral and vertical movements to scrape vegetation from the substrate, in addition to creating spaces for water flow and food retention. This type of functional innovation is unusual among Mesozoic marine reptiles, which more commonly show adaptations for predation or carnivorous feeding. Paleontologists comparing the biology of Atopodentatus with other marine reptiles note that although there are convergences with other filter-feeding herbivores such as Henodus, the anatomical solutions are markedly different. This makes Atopodentatus a unique example of how evolution can explore a wide spectrum of functional morphologies in response to specific ecological needs, in this case the exploitation of marine vegetation. Therizinosaurus. Therizinosaurus represents one of the most puzzling and alien cases among theropod dinosaurs, an animal that at first glance seems almost designed to defy all conventional evolutionary logic. Its morphology combines a massive body, a long neck, extremely modified forelimbs with gigantic claws, and a herbivorous diet within a clade that mostly evolved toward carnivory. The only known species, Therizinosaurus cheloniformis, lived in the late Cretaceous, approximately 70 million years ago in what is now Asia, primarily in regions of the Gobi Desert and the Nemegt Formation in Mongolia. The discovery of Therizinosaurus dates to 1948, when paleontological expeditions in Mongolia recovered the first remains of this animal. The species was subsequently described by Evgeny Maleev in 1954. Due to the rarity of fossils, The initial remains were fragmentary, consisting of large claws, parts of the limbs, and some bones from the legs. This scarcity of material led to early misinterpretations. Maliv even thought they belonged to some kind of turtle-like reptile, hence the specific name Cheloniformis, which literally means turtle-shaped. However, later discoveries and comparisons with more complete relatives clarified that Therizinosaurus was a theropod dinosaur with unique traits. What immediately distinguishes Therizinosaurus from the vast majority of theropods are its extraordinarily long manual claws. The ungual bones, meaning the bones of the claws, reached over 50 centimeters in length, the longest known in any terrestrial animal. These claws were elongated, rigid, and curved only at the tips, giving them a sickle-like shape immortalized in its common name, scythe lizard. These structures do not appear adapted for cutting or tearing flesh as in other theropods, but rather for grasping, pulling, or manipulating vegetation. The forelimbs of Therizinosaurus were surprisingly robust and had 3 fingers bearing these enormous claws. The combination of upper arm and forearm suggests that the animal had well-developed muscles in this region, capable of withstanding significant mechanical stress, consistent with the idea of intensive use of these limbs to interact with vegetation, whether to reach or tear leaves and branches. These long arms may also have served for territorial display, defense, or perhaps even social interactions with other individuals of the species. In contrast to its muscular forearm, Therizinosaurus had a relatively small skull in relation to its large body. The neck was long, allowing it to reach vegetation at different heights without moving excessively. Based on more complete relatives within the Therizinosauridae family, it is proposed that it had a keratinous beak, either toothless or with highly reduced teeth, a trait common in herbivorous species. Associated with a broad torso and robust pelvis, this anatomical combination clearly shows adaptation to a plant-based diet, very different from its carnivorous theropod ancestors. The body proportions of the animal were equally unusual. Therizinosaurus is estimated to have reached between 9 and 10 meters in length, with a height of up to 4 to 5 meters and a weight exceeding 5 tons. These dimensions make it one of the largest known theropods, and clearly one of the largest maniraptorans ever. Its massive and slow-moving body contrasts with most theropods, which are generally more agile and oriented toward hunting. Although originally considered to have diverse affinities, from turtle-like reptiles to possible ancestors of sauropods or ornithischians, modern phylogenetic studies firmly place Therizinosaurus within Theropoda, specifically in the group Therizinosauria and more precisely in the family Therizinosauridae. This group as a whole is characterized by transforming members from an ancestral predatory lifestyle to a predominantly herbivorous or omnivorous state, with significant modifications in limbs, dentition, and body posture compared to other theropods. The herbivorous evolution of Therizinosaurus and its relatives represents an extreme example of ecological plasticity within theropod dinosaurs. Evidence suggests that these animals developed herbivorous adaptations independently of other more classic herbivorous dinosaurs such as hadrosaurids or ceratopsians. While the latter developed specialized beaks and dentition for efficient plant processing, Therizinosaurs opted for a combination of beaks, long necks, and giant claws as tools to manipulate and gather vegetation. This dietary and lifestyle shift is reflected in its ecology. Therizinosaurus would have been a high browser capable of accessing vegetation that few other herbivores could reach, thanks to its combination of extended neck and long-reaching arms. Its weight and robust body also allowed for a relatively slow-paced lifestyle without the need for speed or agility, traits more typical of predators. Locomotion in Therizinosaurus was bipedal, relying on powerful hind limbs ending in functional 4-toed feet with all 4 digits capable of supporting the weight, unlike most theropods, which reduced the first digit to a vestigial structure. This anatomical detail reinforces the idea that its posture and mode of movement were distinct, adapted to a lower center of gravity and a wider, heavier trunk. Despite its herbivorous diet, there is evidence that Therizinosaurus may have also used its long claws for defense or to interact with other individuals. The robustness of the arms indicates that these limbs were not merely ornamental but functional for tasks requiring strength and control. It is plausible that these traits also had a component of sexual or social display within the species, although this is difficult to demonstrate with the incomplete fossil record. The environment in which Therizinosaurus lived was a region rich in vegetation, with large bodies of water, trees and plants providing a broad niche for large herbivores. It shared this habitat with other iconic dinosaurs of Mongolia, such as titanosaurs, ceratopsians, and carnivorous theropods like Tarbosaurus. The height of Therizinosaurus made it an effective competitor for high foliage resources where few other animals could easily reach. The unique anatomy of Therizinosaurus, that is, its combination of robust body, long neck, herbivorous diet, four-toed feet, and extraordinary claws, makes it one of the most unusual dinosaurs ever discovered. Through its biology, this animal challenges the traditional stereotype of the carnivorous theropod, showing that even within a clade largely defined by predatory diets, evolution can explore paths as unusual as large-scale herbivory. Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus aegyptiacus is one of the most enigmatic and unusual dinosaurs to appear in the fossil record. Its combination of colossal size, unusual morphology, and adaptations for a partially aquatic lifestyle places it far from the stereotype of the terrestrial carnivorous dinosaur. It lived during the mid-Cretaceous, around 100 million years ago, contemporaneous with other large dinosaurs of northern Africa, and was endemic to riverine and coastal environments that today include Morocco, Egypt, and other parts of North Africa. Its discovery history, conflicting interpretations, and constant scientific reinterpretations make it a fascinating case of how paleontology can redefine what it means to be a giant dinosaur. The first description of Spinosaurus occurred in 1915 when the German paleontologist Ernst Stromer von Reichenbach published partial remains found in the Egyptian desert. These bones, later destroyed during World War II, included fragments of long, narrow jaws with conical teeth, vertebrae, and other bones that immediately attracted attention due to their size and unusual shape. From these remains, Stromer deduced that it was a large carnivorous theropod with a body structure different from other known predators at the time. What has most captured scientific and popular imagination is its dorsal sail, a structure formed by very elongated neural spines projecting vertically from the vertebrae along the back. The spines could extend up to 1.8 meters or more above the body, creating a profile that some have compared to a ship's sail. These spines were not present in all dinosaurs, although superficially similar structures existed in other groups such as Uranosaurus, but the size and shape in Spinosaurus were particularly pronounced. It has been proposed that this sail could have had thermoregulatory functions, social roles such as display or intimidation, or even energy storage purposes, although to this day there is no definitive consensus on its function within the scientific community. The skull of Spinosaurus was equally unusual. Narrow, elongated, and with a snout reminiscent of crocodiles, it was filled with conical, relatively smooth teeth that were not designed to tear large terrestrial prey, but rather to catch slippery creatures like fish. The presence of numerous neurovascular openings in the snout suggests that it may have had specialized sensory tissue, allowing it to detect movements in the water, similar to the pressure receptors found in the soft snouts of modern crocodiles. The combination of this dentition, the elongated snout, and colossal size led scientists to infer that Spinosaurus was a predator specialized in piscivory, that is, feeding primarily on fish, though it likely was not limited to this diet. This hypothesis is supported by the discovery of spinosaurid teeth in fossil contexts with giant fish such as Oncorpristis, providing clues about predator-prey interactions in the prehistoric aquatic environment. One of the most transformative pieces in understanding Spinosaurus came with the discovery and analysis of more complete remains in Morocco. Between 2014 and 2020, the team led by Nizar Ibrahim and collaborators recovered skeletal fragments that included an almost complete tail with elements forming an expanded paddle-like structure. Studies of this tail indicate that it had a laterally flattened profile, with prominent bony projections creating a paddle-like contour, distinguishing it from the narrower, more rigid tails of other theropods. Biological analyses and robotic models suggest that this tail could produce significant propulsion in water, allowing it to swim more effectively than its terrestrial relatives. In addition, the high bone density of its limbs and other postcranial bones was interpreted as an adaptation for controlling buoyancy, a trait common in aquatic animals such as manatees or penguins, supporting the hypothesis that Spinosaurus spent much of its life in the water, walking or swimming in deep riverine areas and feeding on large fish. These discoveries suggest that Spinosaurus was likely the most adapted semi-aquatic dinosaur ever identified. Its massive body, combined with a tail adapted for aquatic propulsion, a snout with conical teeth and specialized sensory features, made it more akin to a giant crocodile than a typical predator like Tyrannosaurus. However, this view has been the subject of intense debate. Some researchers have proposed that, although Spinosaurus possessed traits associated with a water-associated lifestyle, it was not a highly specialized swimmer like cetaceans nor fully adapted to a permanently submerged life. Biomechanical studies using complete digital reconstructions have suggested that the animal might have been too buoyant to dive effectively in deep waters, needing to rely on its legs and shallow areas to hunt. These models indicate that in deep water, Spinosaurus could have been unstable and slow, suggesting an ecological style more similar to a coastal and riverine predator than a deep water swimmer. Even within this discussion, most paleontologists agree that Spinosaurus was semi-aquatic, a dinosaur that alternated between land and water, taking advantage of both environments to hunt and move. Oxygen isotope studies in its teeth also indicate that this predator spent a lot of time near water, with ratios closer to turtles and crocodiles than to other typically terrestrial theropods. The environment in which Spinosaurus lived also helps to understand its unique lifestyle. Cretaceous river plains, deltas, and mangroves in northern Africa were filled with giant fish, crocodiles, turtles, and other aquatic reptiles, providing a rich ecological niche that could support specialized predators like it. The abundance of fossil teeth in river sediments suggests that these large theropods actively fed on aquatic prey, leaving a record abundant in dental remains compared to their scarcer postcranial bones. The dorsal sail remained a subject of functional speculation. Some experts consider it a structure for visual display or social signaling, suggesting colors or patterns that could intimidate rivals or attract mates. Others propose a thermoregulatory function, helping the dinosaur absorb or dissipate heat according to climatic conditions, similar to what has been suggested for other species with prominent dorsal structures. By combining all these traits, the snout adapted for catching fish, conical teeth, paddle-like tail, dense bones, water-adapted limbs, and a unique dorsal sail, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus emerges as a singular evolutionary entity. It was not simply a giant, land-hunting dinosaur. It was a predator that fused aspects of the aquatic and terrestrial worlds into a single anatomical form, exploring an ecological niche that no other dinosaur had occupied with such intensity. Nyctosaurus. Nyctosaurus was a pterodactyloid pterosaur that lived in the late Cretaceous, approximately 85 to 75 million years ago, in what is now large regions of central North America. Unlike dinosaurs, especially theropods and sauropods, pterosaurs were flying reptiles that conquered the skies before birds, occupying ecological niches dominated by large aerial and marine predators. Nyctosaurus emerges in this context as one of the most unusual and visually striking pterosaurs, not because of extreme size, but due to the remarkable shape of its skull and the adaptations implied by its cranial structures. The name Nyctosaurus comes from Greek and literally means night lizard. Although there is no evidence that it was nocturnal, it is more likely that this name reflects the imagination of the early paleontologists who named it in the 19th century. The genus was first described in 1876 by Othniel Charles Marsh, a pioneer of American paleontology, based on fossil remains from the Niobrara Formation, an ancient shallow inland sea that covered much of what is now the central United States. These limestone sediments have preserved some of the most complete and well-preserved pterosaurs of the Cretaceous, including numerous Nyctosaurus specimens. One of the most striking anatomical features of Nyctosaurus was its extremely exaggerated and extravagant cranial crest. While many pterosaurs developed crests, osteological structures, or combinations of bone and soft tissue projecting from the head, Nyctosaurus takes this trait to the extreme. In adult specimens, the crest could reach almost 3 times the length of the entire skull, projecting as 2 long, bony spikes extending upward and backward from the rear of the head, creating a silhouette more reminiscent of antlers or crossed horns than any cranial structure seen in living or extinct animals. These crests are composed of thin, elongated, bony projections, and in the most impressive specimens, they can reach nearly half a meter or more in height, even though the animal itself was not large. Fossils reveal that these osteological structures were extremely lightweight, understood as an evolutionary adaptation necessary not to interfere with flight, and were made of thin, probably hollow bone, like the rest of the skeleton. Unlike other pterosaurs that displayed striking crest structures, there is no solid evidence in Nyctosaurus that the crest supported permanent extensions of soft tissue or significant membranous sails, although this possibility has been speculated in older artistic reconstructions. The shape and size of the crest in Nyctosaurus have led scientists to propose several hypotheses about its function. One of the most plausible is that it acted as a visual display structure, possibly related to mate attraction or recognition among individuals of the same species. This idea is supported both by the fact that the crest develops only in adult individuals, juveniles either lack it or have it very reduced, and by the notion that such a structure growing with age could have served as a signal of maturity or vigor. These ontogenetic variations, i.e. changes throughout the animal's development, are typical of display traits used in sexual or social behaviors. Some researchers have also suggested that the crest could have had a secondary aerodynamic function, influencing airflow around the head and slightly altering stability and maneuverability during flight. However, anatomical evidence suggests that the aerodynamic impact of this crest would have been minimal due to its thin shape and the lightness of its bony structure. That is, its presence would not have significantly interfered with flight capabilities, nor would it have contributed markedly to them. This makes its primary function, according to the most recent analyses, more likely visual or social rather than physical. The body of Nyctosaurus was clearly adapted for flight. With a wingspan usually ranging from 2 to 3 meters, this pterosaur was smaller than relatives like Pteranodon, yet still had long, narrow wings, indicating specialization in efficient gliding flight and likely a lifestyle similar to modern seabirds such as albatrosses, capable of covering long distances with minimal energy expenditure. The wings were supported by an extremely elongated fourth finger, characteristic of pterosaurs, while the other hand digits were reduced or absent, which is unusual among known winged reptiles. This feature suggests that Nyctosaurus spent most of its life airborne, with limited capacity to walk or climb even on solid ground. The beak of Nyctosaurus was toothless, like other advanced pterosaurs, and had long, slender jaws likely adapted for capturing fish and other small aquatic animals, while flying over extensive marine and coastal areas where its prey was abundant. Although the fossil record does not yet fully clarify its feeding behavior, it is very likely that this pterosaur was piscivorous or insectivorous via aerial capture, similar to many modern seabirds. Its lightweight anatomy and large wings would have allowed it to glide close to the water surface, capturing unsuspecting prey in flight. The loss or drastic reduction of digits outside the wing, i.e., the absence of functional claws used by other pterosaurs to climb or grip rough surfaces, reinforces the idea that Nyctosaurus likely spent most of its time in continuous flight, landing rarely. This lack of ability to grasp branches or rocks suggests that its nests could have been located on coastal cliffs or open areas where firm ground was not a critical requirement, similar to some modern birds that nest on inaccessible cliffs or islands. The fossil record of Nyctosaurus is not exhaustive, and there are variations indicating possible differences between species or variation within a single species, both in size and in the shape and orientation of the crests. Some evidence suggests that the genus could include several forms with more vertical crests or slightly different development of the bony points, potentially reflecting different specific functions or even sexual dimorphism, where males and females display distinct traits. However, these interpretations still require verification through more complete studies of additional material. Nyctosaurus lived in an environment rich in marine life, alongside organisms such as mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks, and a great diversity of fish soaring through the skies over the shallow seas of the Niobrara Formation. Its presence there, gliding with long wings, supported by a single wing finger and devoid of terrestrial support claws, represented one of the most extreme evolutionary solutions among Mesozoic flying vertebrates, demonstrating not only the versatility of pterosaur design, but also how far adaptive experimentation can go in a lineage of winged reptiles. Basilosaurus. Basilosaurus was a prehistoric cetacean of colossal proportions, so strange and different from any modern whale that for years it was initially believed to be a marine reptile. Unlike modern whales and dolphins, which have relatively short bodies, powerful tails, and adaptations for a highly specialized aquatic life, Basilosaurus had a serpentine, elongated shape, a primitive body structure, and features that made it resemble more a legendary sea monster than an evolutionarily advanced ocean mammal. This marine titan lived during the late Eocene, approximately 41 to 34 million years ago, when seas covered vast regions of the planet, and the oceans were warm, rich in life, and still dominated by ancestral groups of marine mammals. Basilosaurus inhabited these shallow, temperate seas in what is now North America, Northern Africa, and Asia, witnessing a world dominated by giant sharks, other ancient cetaceans, and an abundance of fish and marine reptiles. In fact, the name does little to convey the complexity of this cetacean, as Basilosaurus literally means king lizard, a name given in the 19th century because the first fossils found resembled an elongated reptile so much that scientists of the time did not suspect it was a primitive whale. Only years later, with more detailed analyses, was it confirmed that these creatures were marine mammals, not reptiles, although the name had already been established. The morphology of Basilosaurus is a fascinating mix of primitive traits and early marine adaptations. Rather than a compact, fusiform body like modern whales, it was characterized by an extremely elongated form, resembling a giant eel or sea snake, with highly extended vertebrae giving it a total length exceeding 17 to 20 meters, and even up to 24 meters in the largest specimens. This size placed it among the largest animals of its time and made it the apex predator of Eocene oceans. Unlike modern whales such as the blue whale, whose body mass is concentrated in a robust torso and powerful tail, Basilosaurus had a very long vertebral column constituting the majority of its body. These elongated vertebrae, seemingly fluid-filled in life, acted as a buoyant structure, aiding its position in the water while also giving it a unique swimming style. Instead of a typical vertical tail propulsion, its spine suggests Basilosaurus swam with a lateral, undulating motion, similar to eels and some fish, distinguishing it from any modern cetacean. Its head was also notably primitive. Basilosaurus skulls were large and robust, with powerful jaws bearing heterodont teeth, different types of teeth within a single mouth, including canines and molars, something modern whales lack. This dentition indicates an active carnivorous feeding style. Fossil evidence of bite marks on other cetaceans, such as the smaller relative Dorodon, and on shark bones provides direct proof that these whales preyed upon other marine mammals and large creatures in their environment, placing them at the top of the Eocene marine food chain. Some researchers have compared its ecological role to modern orcas, although with a completely different anatomical design. In contrast to modern whales, perfectly adapted to a fully marine life, Basilosaurus retained vestigial structures from its terrestrial ancestors. For example, it had small rudimentary hind limbs, so reduced that they contributed almost nothing to locomotion, yet remained a reminder of its evolutionary past before its ancestors became fully aquatic. These limb remnants reflect the evolutionary transition of cetaceans from terrestrial ancestors with functional limbs to fully aquatic forms incapable of supporting themselves on land. Another trait indicating its primitive status among cetaceans was the skull and brain structure. Compared to modern whales, Basilosaurus had a smaller, less specialized brain and lacked certain modern cranial features such as the melon of toothed whales, a structure used for echolocation and other sensory functions. This suggests that although a dominant predator, its sensory and social behavior was probably less sophisticated than that of its oceanic descendants. The way Basilosaurus moved was also peculiar. Modern aquatic mammals, like whales, use vertical tail oscillations for propulsion, while fish use lateral movements. Although Basilosaurus was a mammal, Its anatomy suggests it may have combined both modes, or at least used more pronounced lateral undulations than modern whales, an adaptation compatible with its extremely elongated body and life in relatively shallow waters. Basilosaurus inhabited tropical and subtropical seas dominated by the ancient Tethys Ocean, a primitive ocean that for much of geological history separated Africa and India from Eurasia. These seas and marginal marine environments were rich in marine life, from giant sharks to other cetaceans, sea turtles and large fish, providing ample prey for a large predator like Basilosaurus. Fossils have been found in diverse locations such as Alabama, Louisiana, Egypt and Pakistan, showing its wide geographic distribution and ecological success over millions of years. Its widespread presence suggests it was one of the great dominators of the Eocene seas, occupying a niche similar to that of modern apex predators, yet with anatomy and physiology characteristic of an earlier stage in cetacean evolution. The enormous size of Basilosaurus makes it one of the largest known animals in the interval between the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction and the diversification of modern cetaceans. It stands as a prehistoric colossus with few comparable examples outside the realm of giant dinosaurs and modern whales. Despite its size and ecological success, Basilosaurus did not survive indefinitely. Climatic and ecological changes toward the end of the Eocene, including shifts in ocean currents, global cooling, and modifications in food chains, led to the extinction of this marine giant around 36 million years ago, marking the end of one of the most unique stages in cetacean evolution. Macrauchenia. Macrauchenia is one of those prehistoric animals that seems plucked from an evolutionary dream. A large mammal whose combination of traits evokes several modern animals without being clearly related to any of them. This genus of ungulate mammal developed exclusively in South America and persisted there until nearly the end of the Pleistocene, around 10,000 years ago, disappearing shortly after humans arrived on the continent. The best-known representative of this genus is Macrauchenia patachonica, a species that reached imposing dimensions with a body roughly 3 meters long, nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulders, and an estimated weight of around 1 ton. Like many aspects of its biology, these figures are approximate and derived from comparisons with well-preserved fossil remains recovered from multiple localities across southern South America. What makes Macrauchenia appear so strange is how it combines features reminiscent of different modern ungulates into a unique anatomical package. Its overall body is often described as similar to a camel without a hump, with long, robust legs, an extended neck, and a relatively small head. However, anatomical details reveal that despite some superficial similarities, Macrauchenia is not closely related to modern camels, horses, rhinoceroses, or tapirs. It belonged to a completely distinct group, the Litopterns, an extinct order of ungulate mammals that thrived in South America throughout much of the Cenozoic. The Litopterns, including Macrauchenia, are part of a broad and diverse group of South American mammals known collectively as meridiungulates, which evolved in isolation for much of South America's geological history. Before the Isthmus of Panama formed and connected the two continents, South America remained isolated for tens of millions of years like a continental island. In this context, endemic lineages of ungulates, giant rodents, large terrestrial sloths, and other groups evolved with no direct equivalents elsewhere in the world. The etymology of Macrauchenia reflects one of its most distinctive features. Its name combines the Greek words makros, meaning large, and ochein, meaning neck, referring to its long cervical region, a trait reminiscent of giraffes or camels, though not evolutionarily related to either. This long neck likely allowed it to feed on vegetation higher than that accessible to other contemporary herbivores, providing an advantage when competing for food in environments with abundant trees or shrubs. One of the most puzzling characteristics of Macrauchenia is the unusual position of its nasal openings on the skull. These are located relatively high above eye level and further back on the cranium than in most mammals. This arrangement has led to debates among paleontologists regarding whether the animal may have had a muscular proboscis similar to that of a tapir or some other specialized nose structure, not like an elephant's trunk but functional for grasping leaves or vegetation while feeding. Earlier hypotheses proposed that these nostrils might have functioned as a type of snorkel, akin to the nasal passage of whales, but more recent reconstructions favor a short trunk or prehensile upper lip used to grab foliage while grazing. The dentition of Macrauchenia is also notable. As a herbivorous ungulate, it possessed a full set of teeth, including incisors, canines, and molars, in contrast to the highly specialized dentitions of many modern large herbivores. This suggests a varied and flexible diet, probably including leaves, shoots, grasses, and possibly fruits, enabling it to exploit diverse plant resources and adapt to environmental changes over its long evolutionary history. Macrauchenia's limbs were long and ended in 3 hooves or toes, a pattern also suggested for other Litoptern relatives. These hands and feet were robust, indicating that the animal was a capable runner, though not as cursorial as modern horses or antelopes. Biomechanical reconstructions suggest that the bones of the forelimbs and leg joints could have facilitated rapid changes in direction and stable support on varied terrain, useful for evading predators and moving efficiently between grazing areas. From an evolutionary perspective, Macrauchenia represents a branch of mammals that developed independently from the lineages of today's dominant ungulate herbivores. Before the connection between North and South America, South American meridiungulates evolved in isolation from other hoofed mammals worldwide, giving rise to unique forms such as Macrauchenia, note ungulates, and other now extinct groups. This explains its surprising combination of traits: a camel-like body, a head and snout reminiscent of tapirs, feet resembling those of rhinoceroses, and an anatomy that does not fit neatly into any of the major orders of living mammals. Macrauchenia was also part of the late Pleistocene South American megafauna, coexisting with other giant mammals such as the giant ground sloth or Megatherium, glyptodonts, toxodonts, and the saber-toothed cat, Smilodon. The presence of formidable predators and diverse large herbivores suggests that Pleistocene ecosystems in South America were complex and dynamic, with significant ecological pressures and a variety of feeding niches. Despite its success and broad geographic distribution, with fossils found from Patagonia to northern Peru and Bolivia, Macrauchenia did not survive past the end of the Pleistocene. Its extinction, like that of most large mammals of the time, appears to be associated with the arrival of humans on the continent around 14,500 years ago. Evidence of human exploitation and archaeological contexts suggest that hunting contributed to the disappearance of these animals. The legacy of Macrauchenia remains a reminder of how unusual and diverse prehistoric mammals could be, especially in isolated and unique environments like South America prior to the Great American Biotic Interchange. Platybelodon. Platybelodon is one of those prehistoric mammals whose anatomy seems almost absurd when compared to modern proboscideans. It lived during the Miocene, around 15 million years ago, in regions that today correspond to Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. It belonged to a group of proboscideans known as amebelodonts, extinct relatives of today's elephants, but with a unique jaw configuration. A set of tusks and jaw bones so unusual that they appear designed for a completely different purpose than those of modern elephants. The most striking feature of Platybelodon is its extremely wide and elongated lower jaw, ending in 2 flattened, forward-projecting tusks that form a kind of shovel. In fact, the name Platybelodon literally means flat tooth. These tusks were not simply giant incisors, they were fused, forming a very stable structure that extended beyond the upper jaw. Since its discovery in the 1920s, scientists have attempted to understand how this strange jaw functioned. The classical hypothesis suggested that Platybelodon used its shovel-like jaw to dig vegetation in swampy and lacustrine areas, gathering aquatic or semi-aquatic plants along riverbanks and marshes. In this model, the flat tusks would have helped scoop large amounts of soft vegetation, while a short upper lip or trunk would have wrapped the lifted plants and brought them to the mouth. However, detailed studies of dental wear patterns and functional analysis of the tusks have questioned this initial interpretation. The wear observed on the lower incisors does not match the abrasion expected if these teeth had been simply shoveling soft mud. Instead, these patterns resemble those of animals that cut, scrape, or rub tough vegetation, such as bark or firm stems. This evidence suggests a behavior more like a scythe or blade, with the lower jaw acting as a cutting edge for hard plant material while coordinated with the trunk. Modern hypotheses propose that Platybelodon used a more complex feeding strategy. It would grasp vertical or arboreal plants with its flexible trunk and then cut them with the sharp edge of its lower tusks. This implies a diet more diverse than just aquatic vegetation and a coordinated use of trunk and jaw as articulated tools during feeding. Some researchers even suggest that this more sophisticated use of the jaw may have been favored by Miocene ecosystem changes, where the expansion of grasslands and tougher vegetation promoted specialized mandibular adaptations in proboscideans. In addition to its lower tusks, Platybelodon also had shorter upper tusks that curved downward to complement the mandibular structure. With 4 tusks in total, 2 upper and 2 lower, the mouth of Platybelodon was unique among proboscideans. The upper tusks likely had auxiliary functions, helping to tear vegetation, defend against predators, or interact socially with other individuals, as seen in many modern proboscideans where tusks serve social and competitive roles. In terms of size and proportions, Platybelodon was a considerably large animal, though not as massive as today's African elephants. Its body length ranged between 3 and 6 meters, with a shoulder height of approximately 2.2 to 2.8 meters and an estimated weight of 2 to 4.5 tons. These figures place it in a range comparable to large modern elephants, but with a relatively more compact body and much more unusual jaws. The environment in which Platybelodon lived was characteristic of the mid to late Miocene: humid grasslands, savannas with lakes and shallow watercourses, and vegetated riverbanks. These expansive habitats provided a great diversity of herbaceous, shrub, and arboreal vegetation, allowing multiple feeding niches for large herbivores. In this context, the shape of Platybelodon may have allowed it to successfully compete for plant resources in areas where vegetation was not exclusively soft. Another interesting aspect of the genus is that Platybelodon was not the only proboscidean with unusual tusks. It was related to other amebelodonts, such as Amebelodon, Conobelodon, and Archaeobelodon, all showing variations in tusk and jaw forms. Among these, Platybelodon stood out for having an extremely pronounced wide, flat mandibular edge, suggesting a more marked ecological specialization and a possible diversification of feeding niches among proboscideans of that time. The development of these adaptations was neither instantaneous nor isolated. Proboscidean evolutionary history indicates a prolonged period of morphological experimentation in jaws and tusks before the modern trunk and specialized diet emerged. Several extinct proboscidean genera show varying degrees of mandibular elongation and dental modification, likely correlated with environmental changes and the expansion of grasslands during the Miocene. In many cases, these adaptations appear to have arisen in parallel, responding to similar selective pressures to exploit new food sources. Beyond feeding interpretations, Platybelodon also exhibited marked sexual dimorphism, with males presenting more robust upper tusks, posteriorly positioned nostrils, and changes in jaw morphology that may reflect different roles for each sex, whether in mate competition or in the use of visual and mechanical traits during social interactions. The trunk of Platybelodon is another intriguing part of its anatomy that has sparked debate. No soft tissue is preserved in fossils, so its precise shape remains uncertain. Reconstructions based on muscle attachments and comparisons with modern proboscideans suggest that, although it had a functional trunk, it may have been shorter and less versatile than those of today's elephants. It is likely that Platybelodon used its trunk in coordination with its jaw during feeding rather than relying on it to independently grasp plant material. Regarding extinction, Platybelodon disappeared by the end of the Miocene, possibly due to climatic and ecological changes that reduced its specialized habitats, as well as competition with other proboscidean herbivores with more efficient adaptations for different vegetation types. Its legacy, however, remains a vivid reminder of the variety of evolutionary strategies mammals experimented with, many of which are now lost to time. Arsinoitherium. Arsinoitherium was a gigantic and surprisingly exotic mammal that lived in northern Africa during the late Eocene and early Oligocene, approximately 40 to 27 million years ago. At first glance, its appearance resembles a rhinoceros armed with enormous horns, but its true phylogeny places it far from modern rhinoceroses, as a member of the extinct order Embrithopoda. a primitive group of placental mammals closely related to such diverse groups as elephants, sirenians, manatees and dugongs, and hyraxes, highlighting how unusual its lineage was compared to today's fauna. Since its first discovery in 1902 near the Fayoum Oasis in Egypt, a region rich in Paleogene mammal fossils, Arsinoitherium stood out for its massive body structure. The most complete specimens show an animal that could reach 3 to 3.5 meters in length, about 1.75 to 2 meters in shoulder height, and an estimated weight of 1.5 to over 2.5 tons, placing it among the largest terrestrial mammals in its ecosystem. The most striking anatomical feature was undoubtedly its horns. Arsinoitherium had two enormous frontal horns projecting from the top of the nose, immediately followed by a second pair of smaller bumps above the eyes. The larger horns could reach impressive dimensions, up to around 1.5 meters in some specimens, and were composed of hollow, bony cores likely covered with keratin in life, similar to the horns of modern bovids, giving them strength and a solid appearance. Unlike the horns of modern rhinoceroses, which are entirely keratinous, the bony cores of Arsinoitherium were internal structures with neurovascular channels, grooves, and ridges that suggest the presence of attached soft tissues. This design indicates that the horns were not mere ornaments but functional structures probably used in social display, male combat, or to intimidate rivals or predators, though the exact usage pattern is still under study. At first glance, its robust body and size resemble modern rhinoceroses, making it appear as an ecological analogue of those large herbivores. However, its internal anatomy and derived features, particularly the structure of its limbs, pelvis, and skull, make it clear that Arsinoitherium belongs to a completely different lineage. Its limbs were robust and columnar, similar to those of modern elephants, ending in 5-toed feet, unlike the 3-toed feet typical of rhinoceroses. This configuration suggests that its limbs were adapted to support great weight and move on soft or muddy ground, rather than running quickly. The skull of Arsinoitherium also exhibits traits that seem primitive compared to those of other large modern mammals. Its brain was relatively small and simple, similar to other primitive penungulates like early sirenians, indicating sensory and cognitive capabilities distinct from elephants or other large modern herbivores. The animal's dentition reflects its primitive condition among placental mammals. It possessed a full set of 44 teeth, a feature now considered ancestral for placental mammals, in contrast to the reduced and specialized dental patterns of most large modern herbivores. Its molars were adapted to grind tough vegetation, and the jaw configuration suggests a selective feeding mode, likely browsing on leaves, shoots, and other plant parts rather than indiscriminately grazing on large amounts of open grassland vegetation. Arsinoitherium lived during a period in Africa characterized by warm, humid, densely vegetated environments, with extensive tropical forests and coastal mangroves along plains and inland basins. Such ecologies were rich in available plant resources, favoring large herbivores but also requiring special adaptations to extract food from tougher and more diverse vegetation than what modern grassland herbivores consume. What particularly highlights the strangeness of Arsinoitherium is how its overall morphology combines traits that today we would associate with very different animals. Its appearance may evoke a rhinoceros with massive horns, its skeletal structure resembles elephants, and its dentition retains primitive traits absent in specialized modern herbivores. This mixture of convergent and primitive traits testifies to the experimental evolutionary pathways that existed in the past. The exact functions of its horns remain a matter of debate, though many hypotheses agree they played an important role in intraspecific interactions, such as fights over territory or mates during the breeding season. The robustness of these structures and the presence of sexual dimorphism, where horn size may vary between males and females, support this idea. The additional horns above the eyes may also have served for visual signaling or competition in complex social contexts. In contrast to other Cenozoic megafauna that survived until relatively recent times, such as mammoths or giant ground sloths, Arsinoitherium disappeared by the end of the Oligocene, around 23 million years ago, due to environmental changes that transformed the humid habitats it relied upon. Global cooling and the progressive aridification of Africa as the Eocene gave way to the Miocene, and then the Oligocene altered plant communities and ecosystems, reducing the vegetation that Arsinoitherium needed to feed on.